Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of On the Ballot. I'm Norm Leahy, a senior editor here at Ballotpedia, and normally on the ballot, we talk about national issues, big policy issues. One of the things that we do try to spend a lot of time on, though, is talking about local elections. Probably the reason being that when you look at the broader scope of the American, I guess you could call them species of elected officials. There are more than 500,000 of them, probably about 520,000 of them. Roughly 83,000 or so serve on local school boards. A staggering number of people. Far more happens in your own neighborhood than I think many people realize. And to join us to talk about school board elections, how we got where we are, what states are doing about those, is Ballotpedia's expert on education and a staff writer with us, Sam Wanacott. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Norm. So happy, as always, to talk to my favorite editor and the finest wordsmith since H.L. Mencken, the sage of Baltimore himself.
Yes, well, we both have receding hairlines, so we've got that going for us. So let's jump into this. School boards. A lot of people don't give two thoughts about a school board. They don't. If they could find their local school board member in a police lineup, it might be a wild guess. They might actually get it right. But what school boards do, what they have the power to do, what they're forbidden to do, varies all around the country. Give us the 30,000-foot view of what school boards can and can't do across the country.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think school boards are really interesting political institutions. I'm biased because I write about them all day, but I really do think that people should be paying more attention to these unique institutions and their own school districts, their own school board elections. In the, just a quick history, in the 17th and 18th centuries, schools were largely run by city councilmen or aldermen, and then they evolved to become these specially appointed or elected boards, or they were called committees or commissions. Like you said, their roles vary from state to state, sometimes from district to district, but in general, they do share some common traits. Probably the two most important roles or functions that school boards do is hiring the superintendent. This is really important. You can kind of loosely think of school boards as kind of like the city council or the legislature. They're writing the policies, they're setting the vision. The superintendent is kind of like the chief executive officer. He or she is carrying out the school board's wishes. The other important thing that school boards do is approve and, or basically approve the budget, the money, keep the lights on. So those are probably the two most important things that school boards do. But some of the others, they talk with the community. They advocate for students. They set accountability metrics. They and they set some district policies as well.
And overwhelmingly, these are nonpartisan offices. Nonpartisan being a loose term, but in strict terms, that means there's no party label that appears next to a candidate's name on the ballot. What's the breakdown there, partisan versus nonpartisan school boards?
Yeah, so over 90% of our school board elections are nonpartisan. So the overwhelming majority, chances are for our listeners, their school board election is going to be nonpartisan. Now, the reason, that is, up until July 1st, that was 41 states that basically required school board candidates to run in nonpartisan elections. Now, I think the impetus for this podcast is that Indiana just became the 10th state to prohibit school board elections from running in nonpartisan elections. So Indiana just became the 5th state that basically requires partisan school board elections. Now, candidates in those states can run as a Republican, Democrat. You can run as an independent, or unaffiliated, but the on the ballot, the candidates don't have the option of all the candidates running as nonpartisan. There are 5 other states that basically allow for nonpartisan or partisan elections depending on the district. So those are kind of decisions that are made at the local level. So in one this is one example. So in Pennsylvania, they can they can run as the district can basically decide if there's going to be a nonpartisan election or if candidates will be allowed to um, put a party affiliation next to their name.
What's the argument made, for example, in Indiana, because that's the state that most recently did it, and the governor had started out in politics there as a school board member, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing about the governor. So I think we need to step back for a second just to give some national context before we get into the details here. So ever since the pandemic, there has been um, concern that more and more school board elections, typically nonpartisan, sleepy affairs, have been reflecting national political debates over things like the responses to the pandemic or sex, race, or gender, um, uh, as opposed to the more like prosaic topics that maybe school board elections used to be more concerned with, like how to keep the lights on without laying off a bunch of staff or uh, student achievement or things like that. We've seen governors endorsing school board candidates
Uh-huh.
in recent years. That's virtually unheard of. There's been the rise of national political organizations, most of them partisan, that champion or um, fund school board candidates. So that's kind of the mood coming out of the pandemic. The proponents of making school board elections partisan argue that actually school board elections have always been political. We just weren't talking about it openly. So candidates would run as nonpartisan, and voters might just assume they don't have any strong political beliefs. They're uh, just there to govern the school district as impartially as they can. So proponents of making school board elections partisan say that this is actually increasing transparency for voters, allowing them to select the school board candidate who best reflects their values.
Well, let me ask you this. And there's a big one for you. Does partisanship on a school board, let's say you've got X number on this side and X number on that side, does that actually change student outcomes any? Do they test? Does it affect test scores, school budgets, school construction, teacher retention? Does it affect any of that stuff? Or is it just one more thing that we add a label to?
Well, there has been some academic research on this, and I think that the unsatisfying answer is that it's still not entirely clear.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. So, more, in other words, more work needs to be done. But to get back to the Indiana example, why did they go from nonpartisan to partisan elections?
Well, so the proponents of the bill, including the governor, I mean, basically said that their argument was that it was a transparency measure, that it would help voters align with their candidates in terms of their values and worldview. It passed narrowly though, so especially in the Senate, where I think it passed 26-24, you actually saw 14 Republicans join with Democrats to oppose this bill. And the arguments that those Republicans who basically wanted to keep school board elections nonpartisan, what they said, and these arguments echoed what their Democratic counterparts were saying and what opponents of partisan school board elections say in general, which is that it's just going to it's going to make school board elections more politicized. Um, it's going to uh, attract people who are more interested in uh, making a career out of politics than doing the sort of unsexy work of governing a school district. Um,
But
one
Florida,
Repub
let me interrupt you. Florida had a different experience, didn't it? It went from partisan elections to nonpartisan elections, correct?
That's correct. In 1998, Florida voters approved a measure that made their school board elections nonpartisan.
And a recent attempt to go back to partisan elections, what happened to that?
So that failed. So that was last year. That was probably one of the more noteworthy ballot measures in Florida. Um, as someone who writes about this stuff all the time, I'm biased, but maybe in the whole country last November. Um, but yeah, something like 50. So this is interesting because something like 56% of Florida voters supported making school board basically overturning the 1998 measure and making their school board elections partisan again. But in Florida, just a quirk of their ballot measure laws, you have to meet a 60% threshold. So the measure failed. But it seemed like a more than majority of voters were okay with going back to partisan elections.
And what's brewing out there right now? Is there any kind of a trend toward more partisan elections that you can see on the horizon, or are they just here and there irregular?
Yeah, it's hard to say if there's going to be a wave of states like Indiana that are changing their school board election systems. Um, what we can say is that there does seem to be an uptick in the number of lawmakers, state lawmakers, who are proposing bills that would make their school board elections partisan. Um, most of these bills die in committee, though, so it's hard to say if how many of them are actually going forward, going to become have the chance of becoming law. Um, I think this year we saw at least 13 bills in around 11 or 12 states that would have made school board elections partisan. Again, outside of Indiana, most of those didn't really go anywhere. But that is an increase from 2024 when we saw 7 and 2023 when we saw 3. So, that trend continues, we might see a handful more in the next session.
And one more for you, Sam. Ballotpedia's done a lot of studies on local elections over the last few years. One of the big things that's come out of our analysis of those elections, particularly the ones that of the thousands that we've covered, is the rising dearth of competition. That more and more of these elections for school boards, what have you, go uncontested. There's either one candidate or in the worst case scenario, there are no candidates. This strikes me as a really big problem. What are you seeing? Is anybody trying to address this? Is anybody trying to drum up support, drum up candidates, make the job more enticing to people to run? What do you see? Anything?
Yeah, well, I mean, go back to what I said about some of these nationwide organizations that have sprung up since the pandemic, that endorse or fund school board candidates. Now, most of these organizations have a partisan agenda, but one thing they are trying to do is trying to make uh, encourage people to run for their local school board. Like you said, most of these races go uncontested, and that's a huge opportunity if you're a political party or political organization to step in and make some change.
Or if you're a person who doesn't care about either party, who just wants to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
But as you've looked at this stuff and you've heard from a lot of school board members, you've attended their meetings, their conferences. What are they telling you about this? How do they feel about the job these days?
I think they feel like it's a hard job. I mean, most school board members are unpaid. Um, they are the work is not necessary. It's not sexy work. It's hard work. You talk to a lot of parents who are unhappy. I mean, that becomes like a large part of your job is sitting at these school board meetings and talking to the parents who are upset. Um, so, I think it does take a special kind of person to get out there and do this really this free labor out of a concern that kids need to be educated, that we need to do better about educating our kids.
And it also takes a special kind of person to cover education as thoughtfully and thoroughly as you do, Sam. I want to thank you for joining us on the Ballot today. Appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Norm. Always a pleasure.
And I'm Norm Leahy. This has been another edition of On the Ballot. You can catch this wherever you listen to podcasts. You can even see our lovely mugs on YouTube. Just hide the kids before you do so. Until next time, I'm Norm Leahy, and this has been On the Ballot. And until we do meet again, I'll see you in the digital pages of Ballotpedia. Take care.